Welcome to episode 70 of the Becoming Mind Strong podcast. I have to say, I've been at this podcasting thing for a while now, and this was far and away my favorite season to record personally. I hope it resonated with you guys. I just had a blast. I love digging into these deeper life topics and just really getting into the nitty gritty of why we do what we do, right? We get one go around in this lifetime, and it is so much bigger than wanting to have muscles or wanting to lose a certain amount of pounds on a scale. Like, this is about life, and I love being able to have these conversations and dig deeper. Before we dive into the final episode of the season, I'm going to ask a favor. If you are listening and loving the podcast, if you can do me a favor and leave a review, it is a massive help. The way that reviews work is they help bump us up in the algorithm so that other people can find us. So taking a couple of minutes to hit how many stars you'd give, write a few words. It is a tremendous help to helping other people find us. And from the bottom of my soul, thank you, thank you, thank you in advance. So we started this season. I shared with you a bit about my trip to Egypt and the way that just completely changed the course of my life, and all this idea about soul work and soul journey and living in alignment. So I thought it was appropriate to close out this season with my 5 steps for living a life in alignment, no matter what's going on around you. And I want to be super clear before we dive in. First of all, we're going to clarify what exactly that means to live a life in alignment. And the other thing I want to be super clear about is that life gets messy, man. Like, this is not like, if you follow these 5 tips, your life is going to be perfect and beams of light are going to come out of your chest and it's going to be rainbows and glitter all the time. Absolutely not. One of the things we're going to talk about is that this need for control, this need for homeostasis all the time is setting yourself up for suffering. This is not about reaching this perfection, this nirvana state and staying there all the time. When we talk about living a life in alignment, we're talking about coming back to center. No matter what is going on, life is always going to be going on around you. There's going to be ups, downs, and everything in between. And when we're talking about living a life in alignment, we're talking about having the tools to come back to your highest self, to come back to your center, to breathe, to show up as your best self as often as we can, knowing we're going to be knocked off course, knowing there's going to be times where more in our head and times where more in our heart. But how do we construct a life where we know where our center is and we can come back to it no matter what's going on? Check it out. So in the very first episode of the season, we talked a little bit about what I meant when I say your soul's work or your soul's journey. And that phrase, I kind of use interchangeably with living in alignment, right? They're not exactly the same, but all of this comes down to me about being in your center and just living this life that just freaking feels unleashed. I shared with you before that when I'm in my center, when I'm in alignment, I feel like my chest is expanded. It feels like there's this freaking beam of light coming out and I'm feeling it come back from others. Like, that is when I know that I am in my center, that I am aligned, that I am doing my soul's work, I'm on my soul's journey, and that my life is freaking unleashed. So when I'm talking about, when I say to live in alignment, right, what does that mean? Some people call it your soul's work. Some people call it flow. Some call it being in your center. There's no right or wrong terminology, and honestly, there's a million definitions for it. So I want to clarify that up front, that this is the way that I, Rachel, choose to talk about this. When I talk about a life of alignment, it means this is when I am in my center. This is my best self. This is where I feel unleashed. Now, with that, I want to share with you my top 5 tips for how to live life like that. And as I said in the intro, this is never going to be black or white, right? What this podcast episode is not, is check off this checklist of 5 things. And when you do it, your life will be perfect and you'll never experience any kind of hardship or not. Absolutely not. These are tools that we use to consciously build this life and then come back to them when life happens, because life will always, always, always happen. So number 1 is this. The first thing we need to understand is that everything in life is an inside job. Everything in life is an inside job. We will never, ever be able to control what goes on in life, right? We can't control what our boss does or doesn't do. We can't control what our spouse does or doesn't do. We can't control if someone's nice to us or mean to us. We can't control, to an extent, if our kids listen to us or don't listen to us. There is life that is always going to happen. And the challenge for a lot of us is that we go down the rabbit hole of things that we experience, right? Oh, I lost my keys and I spilled my coffee. I'm having a terrible day. Oh, my boss was an asshole to me today, so now my whole day is ruined. One of my favorite newest expressions, a friend of mine taught me this after Egypt. This is this expression that there's the trigger, but then there's the whole gun. And what we need to start to understand to live in alignment is that when external things happen, they push on a trigger for us. And that trigger, even though it doesn't feel good, even though it's uncomfortable, what that trigger is showing us is that there's a deeper wound internally that's being pushed on. Whatever the external situation was, whether it's your boss being a jerk or your spouse snapping or your kid spilling your coffee, if you have an extreme or any kind of a reaction to that, that's the trigger. But that's not the whole thing. Where the real work to do is what's the gun? What is the wound behind that trigger is pushing on, right? Maybe there's a deep-rooted childhood abandonment wound. Maybe there's a rejection wound. I mean, we could talk about this for years. There's whole coaches that do what's called parts work. I have an amazing parts work coach, and this is the work we do is, okay, we know what our triggers are, but let's dig in and let's find the wound underneath so we can start to do that healing internally. And when you start to do this work, when you can understand, oh, wait a second, this is not about my boss. Yeah, like they just yelled at me and they were a jerk and that was not necessary. And there's some emotional distance that I'm not putting there, right? This is not woo-woo pump you up stuff where it's about like, oh, that doesn't affect me. I don't feel anything. Power of positive thinking. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. This is about truly understanding, okay, that didn't feel good. My boss was a jerk. That is about him or her. And why did that hit so deeply? What is this internal wound that's pushing on so that I can do the work to start healing, whether it's the little version of me or some past version of me that's feeling activated right now. When we understand that everything in life is an internal job, we are not responsible for what goes on in the outside world. The only thing we are responsible is for our own healing. That's when we start to step into our power. That's when you're in a romantic relationship and the person has an avoidant attachment, so they keep pulling away. And your nature is to chase after them and to feel like crap and to ruminate until you get them back. When we can do the internal work and understand, wait a second, this is not about that person. This is about a deep childhood wound. And how do I sit with the little version of me and love her and nurture her and come into my own center? So I can give that freedom to the person they can react however they want. My boss can act however they want. My partner can act however they want. I'm going to keep coming back to center to myself. That is the number one way to live a life of alignment. It doesn't mean nothing in life's going to trigger you. It doesn't mean that shit isn't going to happen in life. It means that no matter what's going on externally, we have the power to come back to ourselves, to self-soothe, to self-nurture, and to self-heal. Number two is this. Number two of my steps for living an aligned life. One of my favorite expressions is lead with your heart, but have boundaries like a mother. And I'm not going to say the full word on here because I try not to drop the F-mob on here. But lead with your heart and have boundaries like a mother. There is this very ill-conceived belief that having boundaries makes you a bitch. And it's really fascinating. This is a pattern that I've noticed, especially with women. A lot of women respect other women who have strong boundaries. They're like, wow, like you could just say no to that. Wow, you could just say like, I'm not available for that. I wish I could do that. Like, we respect it. But when the time comes for us to do it, there's this story that makes me a bitch if I do it. When we know what we now know about energy, right? We've talked about it in past episodes here. It's in my book. It's in older podcast episodes. When we know that what we are putting out back is literally what we're attracting, that this is a rule, this is quantum physics, like attracts like when it comes to energy. If you are continuously putting yourself in situations that are draining your energy, if you're around people who suck the life out of you, if you're going to a job every day that you hate, or a boss who's cruel to you every single day, there is no way, physically impossible for you to live a life that is completely, and I'm going to use that word loosely, completely. There's no way for you to live a life that's in alignment. Because your energy, the energy you're putting out is the energy you're attracting back. And if you don't have this freaking force field around your own energy, if you're letting it be pulled and sucked down in every direction, that is what you're attracting back. And I want to be clear, when I say a force field, this does not mean you have a 50-foot wall up between you and other people, right? We're leading with our heart is open, and we have boundaries like a mother. So when we're in a situation that doesn't feel safe, when we're in a situation where someone's trying to drain our energy, how do we have the peace of mind, the self-confidence, the stepping into our powerness to say, I'm not available for that? You know, I love you, love and light. I care about you as a human. I cannot be in this situation right now. Whether it's a tough conversation, whether it's a career move, whether it's getting out of or into a relationship, your energy is the single most important thing you have in life. And holding firm boundaries does not make you a bitch. It makes you a powerful human being who knows the importance of protecting it. So number one, understanding that everything is an inside job. We can't control the external world. We can control our reaction to it. We can learn about our triggers, our wounds, and how to self-heal. Number two, lead with your heart, have boundaries like a mother. Number three, and I'm laughing as I'm saying this one, because number three, I'm going to group together communication and vulnerability. And if you had asked pre-Egypt Rachel, if you had told pre-Egypt Rachel that she was going to do a podcast episode where she talked about vulnerability, I would have laughed in your freaking face because vulnerability is not something that is part of my vocabulary for pretty much my entire life. Depending on how much you followed my content or read my book, vulnerability was not a part of my upbringing. I was raised in a family where feelings were weakness, vulnerability was weakness. You put your head down, you get shit done, you succeed. So growing up, I would get in situations where I was around people who clearly had feelings, had emotions, wanted to be vulnerable with me. And I had a 50-foot wall up because to me, that was weakness, right? There was judgment going on like, oh, you're crying, that's weak. And what I have learned in this process post-Egypt of my soul cracking open and my armor coming off and all the things we talked about in the first episode is that is a freaking superpower, man. Like the way that you step into your power is all the things we talked about in the first steps, right? Knowing it's an inside job, self-healing. When you do the work to self-heal, there is nothing in life that can fluster you. I don't mean that literally, right? Things fluster us, but I mean, when you know that you can come back to yourself, it does not matter how the people around you act, because at the end of the day, it might take some work. It might take some crying. It might take some meditating. It might take some nurturing yourself. But when you know you've got you, that is a freaking superpower. And with that, with that comes boundaries, the second step we talked about. But with that, the ability to show up vulnerably and speak your truth is one of the most powerful tools in life. To be able to sit there and openly cry and say to someone, hey, I'm feeling disconnected from you. Hey, you know, I'm feeling like I kind of put my heart on my sleeve there and it wasn't reciprocated. Hey, you know, if we're going to be in this working container together, here's the kind of communication that I need, because what I'm hearing when this happens is this. And I know that's not your intention, but there's a story in my head of blah, blah, blah. When you can just speak your truth like that, holy crap, does the world unlock to you. And again, like a lot of these topics this season, this is not a checklist, right? It is going to be really hard to show up vulnerably, to communicate to that level if you are not doing the work to self-heal. If you don't know how to come back to your center, then being vulnerable, then being that level of communicative is going to feel like standing in the middle of Times Square naked. It's not going to be comfortable. But when you can get to a space, and this is life's work, this is a work in progress. When you can get to a space where you can say, you know what, I'm feeling a little rejected right now. I know that has nothing to do with you, but the story in my head is X, Y, and Z. And you know that no matter how that person responds, whether they show up the way that you're hoping, whether they give you the world's crappiest answer, when you know that you can come back to you and you can hold those boundaries and you can self-soothe, there is nothing more powerful in life. And I will tell you, as someone who has learned about herself, that what lights me up is love and connection. You cannot have love and connection without vulnerability. You know, I've talked a bunch of the season about pre-Egypt and post-Egypt Rachel. Pre-Egypt Rachel loved people. I've always loved people. I love meeting new people. I'm a very social person. And I always had a wall up. Like someone told me after Egypt, the way she put it was beautiful. She's like, I feel like there's been a crowd of us just like waiting at the wings to hug you, but your arms were out and wouldn't fully let us in. And now it's like, here's my freaking heart, man. Like, I have boundaries like a mother. I will armor up if I need to, if I don't feel safe. But here's my freaking heart. Like, I am going to love into you and I'm going to accept it back from you. And this is a work in progress. I have spent my entire life not feeling the feeling of vulnerability. So it feels scary. It feels unsafe at times. It feels wildly uncomfortable. And I have literally never felt more love or connection or happiness in my life. If you want fulfillment, especially if you're a people person, which most of us are, humans are wired for connection, right? It's various degrees, but we are wired for connection, and that cannot happen without vulnerability. And the way to feel safe with vulnerability is learning to have that level of communication. So we've got everything is an inside job, right? Boundaries. Lead with your heart, have boundaries like a mother. Communication and vulnerability I'm putting together in step 3. Number 4 is this idea of consciously building. And we talk about this all the time. We've talked about it this season. We've talked about it in past seasons. I'm also going to add stripping away to this, consciously building and stripping away. And I will tell you, I love the timing of the universe. So I had mapped out what I wanted to talk about in this episode before recording it, obviously. And a little bit before I hit record to start, I was having a call with one of our Ignite members. And this particular woman has gone through a tremendous amount of loss in the past year. It is heartbreaking to hear how much loss she went through. And it led to this beautiful conversation about the beauty of loss. The hardest thing about loss is, the realization that like time is fleeting. Like sometimes you don't get to say goodbye and that's it. And the finality of it is like, what? Like what just happened? The flip side of that, because there's always light with dark and dark with light. The beauty of loss is there is nothing in life, I believe, that will make you prioritize more quickly than the experience of loss. If you have ever lost someone close to you, chances are that moment made you reflect on your life more than anything else. All of a sudden, it's like, why the hell have I ever worried about this thing? Why the hell am I not spending more time doing this? Why the hell am I spending all my time doing this thing that I hate? Because when you experience loss, especially when it's sudden, but it doesn't have to be sudden, it makes you realize in that moment that the expression life is fleeting is not just something we say, it is truth. I've shared in earlier episodes, when I was in my very early 30s, I lost one of my closest friends at the time who was in his very early 30s. And it was one of the hardest things my friend group has ever been to. To this day, I can't talk about it without, if I went deep dive, I would start crying on this podcast. But that moment was absolutely pivotal. That was a defining moment in my life that I can feel back into and say, not another week, not another day, not another minute, not another second. Like I refuse to live a life that doesn't freaking light me up, because I just watched my friend go from this big, burly, strapping, healthy man to withering away within a year and then dying. There is nothing in life that will make you prioritize faster than death. And my hope is that we can get that message without the experience of loss. So when I talk about consciously building and stripping away, it's this element of prioritizing your life. Like it's one of those things that's so easy to say and it's so challenging to do. But the reality is like, we do not get more time. You get this one lifetime. And if you are going to a job every day that you hate, and you're with a partner who is just draining your energy, and you're sitting there and you're beating yourself up all day long, and you're uncomfortable in your skin, and you're dragging through life just trying to get through another day. I say this with all the love in the world. You are going to look back when you are 99 in your own rocking chair, and you're going to say, what the hell did I do? I wish I had. There's nothing scarier in life to me than the thought of I wish I had. And we get to take the steps now to consciously strip away what no longer serves and consciously build the life that we want. It does not mean it's easy. It does not mean that we won't face fear. This is the scary shit in life. It is easy to coast through life. It is easy to stick with same old. And we're not going to be happy, and we're not going to be fulfilled, and we're not going to live in alignment. This stuff doesn't happen by accident. If you want to live a life where you spring out of bed every day and say, I cannot believe I get to live this life, that is never going to happen by accident. It happens by consciously stripping away what's draining your energy and consciously building what serves. The last step is this, and this is a tough one for me. I will tell you honestly that this is one that I have to remind myself over and over and over again. You know, from our conversations about nutrition, our conversations about workout, our conversations about mindset, that we are wired for homeostasis. This is true both in our mindset and in our physical bodies, right? The reason we sweat, if you're watching this podcast on YouTube instead of listening, I'm recording in a place where it's 90 degrees right now and I am sweating. And the reason I'm sweating is because it is not my body's homeostasis to be this hot. So my body produces sweat in an effort to cool me down. Right? There's a physical element of homeostasis that our body always works to get back to. It's the same with your mindset. It's the same with your weight, right? Your body sometimes, it's not that it's fighting against you. It's that your natural resting comfort zone is easy. It's safe. And knowing what we know about our caveman brains, it's always trying to get back to safety, which is homeostasis. So I say that because the last step of my 5 steps for living an aligned life is understanding that life is always going to ebb and flow. And when we try to live a life that is always resting in homeostasis, we are setting ourselves up for suffering, right? This is a really easy example for this is relationships. When relationships are good and they're smooth sailing and they're in flow, that's beautiful. That's what we want. We're like, oh, life is great. My relationship is going great. There's nothing to think about. But then let's say one day your partner is distant. Your partner's pulling away. Maybe they're upset with you, or maybe it has nothing to do with you. Maybe they're just busy at work. And then we go down the path of rumination and anxiety and anxious attachment style, whatever that looks like for you. There's a beauty to being able to say, okay, you know what? Of course I'm feeling this way. Of course I am. One of my coaches, Jordan, my parts word coach, taught me the beautiful power of course, when it comes to feelings. Listen, last week we were in flow. We were in our own homeostasis, which is beautiful. We have a healthy relationship. We communicate. We're open. We're vulnerable. So right now, this week, while things don't feel great, of course it doesn't feel good in this moment. Of course I'm uncomfortable. That is valid. I'm not going to suppress it. And this isn't permanent, right? Just because this week feels off does not mean that our relationship is ruined, that we're destined to go down a rabbit hole that leads to a divorce or a breakup. All of life ebbs and flows. And where we create more suffering is when we have this false belief that everything has to be homeostasis all of the time. Someone gave me the great visual once of, if you ever played the game Trivial Pursuit, right? There's that circle with the little pie pieces. So if we think of our life that way, let's say we have a piece for career and finances and family and love and children or chores, whatever your pie looks like. It is very rare that we are going to have every piece to that pie filled all the time. But as humans, what we tend to do is we create suffering in our life by setting that as an expectation. That if every piece of that pie isn't filled in at all times, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not doing enough. And then we start with the shoulding and the beating ourselves up. When we can get to a place where we understand, man, life is always going to ebb and flow. That is the beauty of life. If life was flat all the time, it would be boring as shit. It's the ups and downs, right? The rain brings the flowers, like choose your cliche. But that's what makes life beautiful. It doesn't make it any easier in the moment, right? The rough times are going to feel rough. They can feel less rough when we put our tools in place, when we come back to center. But the more we can lean into this understanding of, yeah, it makes total sense. Like, I hear you feelings. I feel you emotions. Of course you feel this way because this week feels different, or today feels different than last week. And this isn't permanent. Life ebbs and flows. And my human nature is to try to get back to homeostasis. And I'm going to accept the fact that right now, this doesn't feel like homeostasis. And I trust that it is going to come back, right? Maybe I have to execute those boundaries. Maybe I have to execute that communication or that vulnerability. And it doesn't need to be a fix that happens immediately. Life is going to ebb and flow. And the more that we can flow with it instead of resisting it, the more beautiful it's going to be. So all of this said, I'm going to wrap not just this episode, but this entire season up with this thought. If you could see the video with my hands flailing, like, this is the stuff that lights me up. You know, I work in an industry of nutrition and workouts. And to me, that is not what this is about. Your health, if we go back to the earlier episodes and we talked about that visual of this pyramid, your physical health, your nutrition, your inner health, your physical outward health, All of this stuff is the base of the pyramid. It is not the point. The point of life is not to die with huge muscles. Maybe for some people it is. For most of us, it's not. That is the foundation, because if we want to get to this top tier, this soul work, this flow, this alignment, that has to be at the root, right? Then we talked about this bridge, mindset work, training our inner monologue to be our best coach instead of a raging asshole. We cannot get to the top tier of this alignment if our mind is fighting against us the entire time. To me, what life is about, the reason for all of this, the reason I teach nutrition, the reason I teach mindset work is for this, because we literally get one go around in this lifetime. And the thought of looking back at the end of it and saying, I wish I hadn't been so afraid. I wish I hadn't let fear call the shots. I wish I had showed up more fully. I wish I had taken leaps. I wish I had loved deeper. I wish I hadn't been so afraid. I wish I hadn't had a wall up my entire life. That's my personal hell. I want to get to my deathbed and be like, you know what? If it's my time because I freaking lived my life. And the way we do that is by consciously building, by consciously taking control of our health, by consciously rewiring our brain, both for habits that serve and for an inner monologue that serves, by consciously constructing a life in alignment, in flow, where you wake up every day and there is just a freaking light coming out of your chest that comes back in both directions. None of this stuff will ever happen by accident, ever. If you are living with the expectation that one day someone is coming to save you, one day you're going to get a new job that's the cure-all, one day you're just going to wake up and life is suddenly different, I tell you this because I love you, it is never going to happen. When you wake up and have that moment where you say, you know what, not another month, not another day, not another minute, not another freaking second. Today is the day that I consciously strip away what no longer serves and I consciously build what I want in my life. That is the day you take control. That is the day you step into alignment. And that is the day you live a life that sets your soul on freaking fire. For more information on MindStrong Fitness or how to work with us or to grab an invite to our next upcoming workshop, go to www.mindstrongfitness.com.